On one occasion, when Jesus appeared to his disciples after he'd risen from the dead, they're back in Galilee. 3 years before, Jesus had called Peter to leave his fishing business, but suddenly Peter said, "I'm going fishing," and the other said, "We'll come with you." Perhaps it was the desire for something familiar, something at least they could understand. But it doesn't go well. And that night they catch nothing. But as the early morning light begins to break, they see a figure on the shore. And the man shouts, "Friends, have you caught any fish?" "No," they answer. "Throw the net on the other side of the boat." Well, what do they have to lose? But as they do, the catch is so great they can hardly drag the net back in. And suddenly John knows who it is. And he says to Peter, "It's the Lord." And immediately the disciples are rowing as fast as they can to get the boat to the land, but not Peter, not the impetuous one. No, he dives in. He's swimming as fast as he can to get to the shore. And when they got to the shore, breakfast was waiting. Charcoal fire with some fish on it, some bread, and Jesus said, "Come and eat." But one of them had so much to talk to him about, so much to sort out. And as they sat by the fire, Jesus said, "Peter, do you love me?" Peter had asked himself that question 100 times since he'd sat by the fire in the high priest's courtyard one day and denied he'd even known Jesus. But now, as he sat by this fire, by the Sea of Galilee, he knew the answer to that question. "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Of course, when he said that, he had no idea what lay ahead. That in the weeks to come, he'd preach to thousands in the streets of Jerusalem, that the message would spread like wildfire, that eventually he would lay down his life for the one who had died for him. He knew none of that then. But as they spoke, Jesus said 2 words. And the minute he spoke them, Peter knew that he was forgiven, that Jesus still believed in him. They were the same words that Jesus spoke 3 years ago by the Sea of Galilee when he first called Peter and his brother Andrew. Jesus said, "Follow me."
Just imagine it. Sometimes when I'm reading the Bible, I try to imagine myself in the story. I try to smell the grass on the Mount of Beatides, to hear the bustle of the money changers in the temple, or feel my way into the blindness of the beggar who met Jesus on the road to Jericho. And as I think of this particular event, I try to imagine myself in the boat at night with the disciples on the lake. In just a few days, the disciples' lives had been turned upside down. They had lost their leader and friend. And in response, they have grasped the comfort of going back to what they knew, fishing. They took their boats out as usual, but they caught nothing all night. There was just so much time to think, to go over bit by bit all that had happened in the past few days. I tried to imagine myself sitting in that boat with them on the lake. I wonder if one of them might have strained their eyes in the darkness, hoping to see Jesus walking on the water towards them as he'd done before. But there was just the silence and the darkness, just too much time to think. I found a devotion by Chris.com. And it's called Peter Went Back to Fishing. I've added a few things and tweaked, and essentially this is how it goes. To me, one of the most interesting decisions anyone made in the Bible came from Peter and the disciples in John 21 verse 3. Peter told the disciples, "I'm going fishing. And they all replied, "We'll go with you." So they went out and fished through the night, but caught nothing. 3 years earlier, Jesus had called Peter away from the fishing boats to fish for men instead. For 3 years, they had watched Jesus perform miracle after miracle. John 21 verse 25, we read, Jesus did countless things that I haven't included here. And if every one of his works were written down and described one by one, I suppose that the world itself wouldn't have enough room to contain the books that would have to be written. Then they saw Jesus crucified and resurrected. But let's just quickly take a few steps back. When Jesus and his disciples were on their way to the Mount of Olives on the night Jesus was arrested, we read in Matthew 26 verse 32, Jesus says to them, "But after I am risen, I will go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you there." He wanted them to meet him in Galilee, yet when they arrived, they went back to their old jobs. We don't know how long it was after they returned to Galilee before they went fishing, but it's very indicative of what we all do. God tells us to wait, we wait. He doesn't show up during our timetable and we do something else. We reason, maybe we missed God. Maybe that wasn't God, maybe that was me. So instead of moving forward, we go backwards to what's familiar to us. We pick up old nets and step away from our calling. Just like this night of fishing for the disciples, it's unproductive and unsatisfying. Once you've had a taste of your calling, it's hard to be fulfilled by anything else. Yet Jesus doesn't leave us there. He chases after us like the lost sheep and redirects us. I love in the story how when Jesus tells them to cast on the other side and the nets fill with fish, Peter doesn't wait to bring them in. He jumps out of the boat and he swims to shore. I believe that's what God is asking each of us to do. It's time we jump out of the boat of the familiar and move towards Jesus. It may be uncharted waters for us, but the fulfillment we seek is to be using the gifts He's given us in the calling He's placed on our lives. So if we find ourselves in the sea of familiar right now, let's jump out of the boat and swim to where God is calling you. Let's follow Jesus.